And at this point, at midlife, all of us have experienced some kind of womb initiation. And when we're going through this initiation of menopause, we're talking about our wombs, we're talking about our hormones. We're not fertile anymore. And it's not just that piece, but it's all of this material that's coming up to be healed, to really embrace. But I do want to put people's attention on it's normal to be having these feelings. Like there's a lot of grief around that. My 6 month menopause mentorship is called Metamorphosis because for me, it's the best analogy. We are in a cocoon. We are completely reincarnating, reiterating from that caterpillar to the butterfly. And it takes time. It's a lot of breakdown. It's a lot of messiness. We don't even know what's going on really. And then we're starting to come into this new sense of self. And all of a sudden we sprout wings and we're like, whoa, I didn't even know this was a part of me,
I'm
right?
so grateful that you are a bridge builder for so many of us. Because if I hadn't come across your work that day on menopause and bringing women together in sacred space, I don't know if I would have been able to make as much sense, just even on the peripheral, of
Mm.
what this is. And when you talked about how every unhealed part of ourselves is basically up for healing, I was like, every part of my being felt resonant with that. It rang so true. Well, hey there, and welcome back to Fire and Soul. I am so happy to have this conversation with you today, all around menopause as the sacred threshold and awakening to the second spring, our second life. I've been looking for the most aligned person to have this conversation with for quite a while now. I've been in full send menopause for about maybe a year, a little bit longer, and as it would be and fate would have it, I was directed to Ashley Turner's Instagram and fully resonated. It like rang so true in my bones of like, yeah, what she's saying, I'm feeling. And so she gets at least whatever I'm going through. And I was so honored when she agreed to say yes, or she said yes to be on the podcast. And we have a history. We were trying to sort it out the exact when and where, but we've known each other or of each other, and we certainly have met back in the day living in Los Angeles, which is where she still resides. But it's been like 2.5+ decades of just being aware of one another and to find ourselves here and to share in this time together that not a whole lot of people are talking about, that's also quite confusing. Feels very holy, and I am most grateful. So this conversation is around perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, understanding the basics, like what is it and how does it show up and what are the different iterations and timelines, and what is it really here to offer us if that is something that you end up resonating with. I certainly do. And so it's a meandering of just a lot of beautiful weavings, including plant medicine and other tools and ways in which to honor the winter of life that menopause really is, if that's the season that you find yourself in as well. So I kind of curated my own little version of a bio for her because there's so much that could be said and should be said. So I highly recommend that you check her out and go follow her on Instagram, Ashley Turner. I'll link it all in the show notes. But in a nutshell, in the moment, she's a licensed psychotherapist, psychedelic facilitator, and founder of many core offerings, including Metamorphosis, Midlife, and Menopause Mentorship. Known for bridging psychology, spirituality, and somatic healing, Ashley helps visionary women reclaim confidence and lead from their deepest feminine power. Her own initiation through overlapping postpartum and perimenopause sparked a dark night of the soul, revealing a massive gap in midlife support beyond hormones. Today, she's on a mission to redefine menopause as a sacred rite of passage. She's been featured in the Washington Post, Yoga Magazine, Journal, Yoga Journal, Mind Body Green, and so many others, and believes that true healing includes all five bodies: physical, mental, emotional, energetic, and spiritual. Obviously, this is a woman who speaks our love language, and she has such a message to share with y'all today. So, without further ado, please enjoy this conversation: Menopause as Sacred Threshold, Awakening the Second Life. Ashley, it's so good to have you on Fire and Soul. Welcome to my little world here in Austin.
I'm so grateful. I'm so excited to reconnect, Michelle.
You know, after all these years, it's crazy. We were chatting before I hit record, and I'm like, how in the world do you look exactly the same as like 25 years ago when we kind of were in similar circles in LA?
For sure. Well, so do you.
Well, thank you. There's so much that I'm excited to chat with you about. It just feels very destined that we're here now, in this season of life, this midlife awakening. I've heard you reference from one of your teachers that it's known as the Great Awakening, menopause, and there's going to be a lot. And so I'm really grateful to have this conversation with our listeners and viewers because I think it's needed. It's not talked about enough. It's this big mystery by design. And I'm experiencing it truly as like a threshold and awakening and
Yeah.
quite frankly, an initiation.
Yeah.
Just when I thought I couldn't, I was like initiation fatigue girl. And then this came on pretty strong within the past year. So we're
Mhm.
going to talk details about our own journeys in a moment, but for those who are still sort of new or a little confused about what it even is, can you give your take on perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause, like just the basics?
Yeah, I think it's so important because I know for myself, I really was in the throes of my journey starting about, I mean, it probably was starting earlier, but me aware of it starting was about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And I had no idea. I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I've been in the wellness world for 25, 30 years. And I didn't know any of the details, parameters, and I was launched into doing my own research. And so this is information that really needs to get out there. So, number one, because I think there's a misconception about age. A lot of people, like myself, and this is something we could talk about later, of our own internalized ageism, our cultural ageism, think that it's like somewhere out there in the future, I'm going to go through menopause. I don't really know what, for me, it was like this nebulous thing. I don't know when it is, probably in my 50s or maybe 60. I don't even know. But the reality is the average age, so the definition of menopause is the day you have not had a period for 12 months. Now, that's a very clinical definition. I want to frame it like that because it's important to understand the context of our medicalized version of menopause. But the definition right now is one day for 12 months you haven't had a period. So that's the day of menopause. And then after that, you're postmenopausal, right? And everything before that is premenopausal. And then we have perimenopause, which is when the hormones really start to shift and decline, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone in particular. And that creates a whole myriad of symptoms in the body, in the mind, in the brain, in the psyche, and spiritually as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the range of perimenopause is typically thought to be 7 to 10 years before that last period. The average age in the United States of menopause is 51 and a half years old. So if you back it out, perimenopause easily is, 40 to 50. If some women are going into the last menstrual cycle at 45, that means really people that are experiencing perimenopausal symptoms at 35, that's totally normal. That's within the range of average. So when I tell people now, you might be experiencing perimenopause, they're like, oh no, I'm 42, I'm 38. It's like, that's the normal range. So I think it's important to put that out there because for myself, I'm 50 now. I was 46 when I had my daughter, beautiful IVF baby miracle, and then breastfed her for 2 years and went right into, as soon as I had her, basically, I was already in perimenopause. I was already probably having symptoms before I got pregnant, but I was in, massive denial of it and thinking like, oh, this is just, I'm recovering from birth or, stopping the breastfeeding. And then I started having some pretty acute symptoms. Some of my first ones were vertigo. I had extreme vertigo one day. I woke up, I couldn't even stand up. I was crawling to the bathroom. It lasted several days, really intense. Went to the emergency room. Pain during sex out of nowhere, just one day, extreme pain. So those were clues to me like, okay, this is totally abnormal. Like, this is something I've never experienced before. And like, could this be menopause? Could this be my hormones shifting? I was still kind of pretending it wasn't
You're a
until,
new mom that doesn't even like cognitively, it's like, what? That doesn't go.
Yeah, cognitive dissonance for sure. And that's another thing I'm very passionate about is that subset of women or people having babies, which is quite large, who are overlapping postpartum and perimenopause. I'm coining the term
Mm,
postpartum perimenopause because there's a lot of us in that range, and that's a whole other subset and a whole other set
mm,
of circumstances, psychologically as well as physically. So that's sort of the range. Perimenopause, 7 to 10 years before your last period. Menopause, you haven't had your period for 1 year. And then I would also want to bring attention to late perimenopause, which is the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years before you stop having your period. And that's really known as a zone of chaos when the hormones are extremely erratic. Where before then, you might have a bit more of a slow decline, but the estrogen is very up and down. It's very unpredictable. But in that last phase, the couple years before your last cycle, it gets really unpredictable and really can be very intense, and symptoms can intensify. So that was my experience for sure. And, along with all the physical and hormonal changes, which affect every system of the body, there's also a huge psycho-spiritual stage of a development that we're in. And so that's what I'm really passionate about as a depth psychologist. And my own journey has been really intense. So, yeah, those are defining some terms.
yeah, I've seen you post on social media, and we'll link to everything about you in the show notes, but around this really profound dark night of the soul,
Mhm.
which is not a fun portal to go through. And it's a purification process. Yeah, we kind of mentioned it in some other ways, a reckoning, a reclaiming. But you're saying like a full on new identity. And so I want to get there in a moment, and we're going to go deep on that because I think I'm in it, but I'm trying to figure out the timing on it. But it might have something to do with my next question, which is how does, in just your own observation and or just conversations with other women in this space, how does like a partial hysterectomy or even a full hysterectomy play into this based on what you've sort of seen?
Yeah, it's such an important question, the medical understanding of what, and there's been such little support for women going through all, anything in our post fertility years, our post reproductive years as women has been drastically understudied and undervalued. And so the vast majority, I need to get the statistics right, but the vast majority of medical research for women, first of all, is so much less than men, but it's also prioritized on our reproductive years. And very little research has been done in our post-reproductive years. So this sector of the medical system is so far behind. You know, yeah, it's hard to even say, but there's numerous reasons for that. The WHI study and so many other influences, but especially, any other layered in conditions such as people that are, I just spoke to one of my neighbors this morning who's going through premature menopause due to, chemotherapy, cancer treatment, and that's a huge sector of women.
Mhm.
Women, that have gone through hysterectomy or partial hysterectomy, any kind of basically medically induced or partially medically induced menopause, which then can happen, it can happen at any age, could be 30, could be 40. And what that does is it decouples sort of the physical symptoms and the physical imperative of the hormone decline from the psychological stage of development. So it can prolong things in a certain sense. Like you might be experiencing some of the physical symptoms, even some of the psychological symptoms because the hormones are going down. And yet you're not quite in that life stage yet. You're not quite in that full midlife, menopausal stage. So, for example, my neighbor this morning, I knew she was in cancer treatment. I don't really know her that well. And so she was like, "Oh my God, you're doing menopause work. I'm so in it. I'm 40 and I just, in my 6 months of chemo and I'm totally in menopause and I don't know what to do. And it's so intense." So she's much younger, she's 10 years younger than me and she has two small children. And so she's just not even in that, full midlife. Like I don't really like the term midlife crisis. I don't like that term. I think it's
Midlife awakening.
pathologizing and demonizing when it's actually a normal stage of development. So I want to normalize these things. But anyway, for someone going through a medically induced menopause, it can create a lot more confusion even. And now there's many different layers to manage because your psyche is also navigating whatever that medical trauma is. And you're working with that, rite of passage and initiation, because whether it's hysterectomy or cancer treatment or any other kind of treatment, those are really big healing stages and have their own needs. And then you're layering in the menopause journey, so it can be really intense. I think it's so important to find the right resources. There's so many great physicians now, Dr. Men OBGYN on Instagram. She works a lot with, she calls it breasties because she's a breast cancer survivor and in perimenopause. And so really supporting women through medicalized menopause and understanding the hormonal options because they're much more nuanced than what most physicians understand.
Yeah, thank you for that. As I was sort of doing my own little, Dr. Google research on my own experience of like, okay, partial hysterectomy 12 years ago.
Mhm.
So just the uterus, but still very much to navigate, right? The psycho-spiritual aspect of that. And it was, yeah, I can say barbaric, but it was a pretty intense experience, pretty traumatic.
Mhm.
I really though think though at about 52 is when I started to enter into
Mhm.
menopause. Like maybe that would have been my last year, right? And but now, so then it would the chaos, that zone of chaos you're talking about,
Mhm.
the intense night sweats, I'm still in it though. So that's the thing is I realize you can't
Yeah.
diagnose me and we're not here for that, but like now, though, I'm going into the next piece, which is what I'm excited to talk to you about, going back to Dark Night of the Soul. And yes, I'm with you. I do not resonate with the term midlife crisis for men
Mhm.
or women. I feel
Yeah.
it's more appropriate to say midlife awakening, right? So it
Mhm.
looks chaotic, but it's really a cleansing, right? It's a purification portal. So as I'm looking at this time, I'm like, I need help. And all of
Yeah.
a sudden, the way that my guides work, I'm like zeroed in on your content yet again. And you were the first and only person at that time that I saw was speaking about this portal very differently. And you referenced that any unhealed wound from our adolescent years, like the time we got our first period, is up. I would use the word for integration, for healing
Mhm.
as we are coming back to wholeness in this whole new identity. I'm paraphrasing, kind of trying to talk about my own experience, even though I'm very much still in it and I don't know what the new identity is yet. It's emerging and I feel shattered.
Yeah.
Shattered. And I'm aware I'm in it. Thank God there's at least that awareness. But I don't know if there's a question in there, but there's got to be something that you can just roll with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you're hitting on, so you still had ovaries, so you were still having the hormonal, it wasn't as much hormonal, but you still had the uterus removed. That's huge. And the trauma of that. And this is a whole other piece that I think I want to just name that. And I'm so glad you brought it in because what there's so much goodness. We are in such an exciting time in the menopause movement and it's exploding and it's awesome. And we have so many, particularly female, but not only female physicians that are just completely changing the industry. Kelly Casperson, Dr. Mary Claire Haver, Dr. Salas, Salas in New York. Like, there's just so many people. And what's out there primarily and leading the charge is this medicalized version of menopause, which is the basic. It's sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a physical experience, but it's not just a physical biological experience. We are not just bodies. The psyche and the soul are interwoven with the body. And so any change on any level affects every aspect of our being, physical, mental, emotional, energetic, and spiritual. So again, to your point, if you're experiencing what one of the things that I am really interested in is the womb initiations that are coming through at this time during the menopausal transition, because what I'm not hearing anyone say is like, we're talking about our womb. We're talking about, the uterus, the vagina, the fallopian tubes, the ovaries, the cervix, like all and the hormones are very essence in a lot of ways. And I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of gender identity, but the essence of femininity in a lot of ways. And and observing the cyclical nature of feminine biology. So the menstrual cycle. So we can't divorce menopause itself from the cyclical nature of not just our beings as women or people with wombs, but as life itself. And so and this goes all the way back to like, what is the culture we're living in? What is the context that we are observing and studying menopause in, and open it back up to a more holistic paradigm, which is one driven by nature, the very essence of life itself in this dimension, which is the yin and yang, the ebb and flow, the feminine, masculine, however you want to look at it, light and dark, solar, lunar. And so we have to place menopause in that context of cyclical living. And so we're in a cycle, and we can go into, I have a beautiful framework that sort of universal, but I've really been tuned into it from my teachers at the Red School. And also a lot of all the work that I've done for the last 30 years with the menstrual cycle and feminine power, and understanding the ebb and flow, and understand. So if we look at, the basic structure of the menstrual cycle, because menopause is a bookend and it needs to be tied. It's intrinsically tied to menstruation, or what's called our menstruality, this framework of every single month we have an ebb and a flow. Our eggs build in the follicular phase, and they move to ovulation, they ripen, they're either fertilized or not. If they're not fertilized, we go to the luteal phase, and there's the decrescendo, and we go into the dark half of the cycle. So first half is the solar building, expanding half, and then the second half is the releasing, shedding half to luteal phase to menstrual phase. So we have the new moon in the menstrual phase, full moon on ovulation. You can expand it out into the year. Winter solstice is the menstruation. Summer solstice is ovulation, the two equinox. So everything that I'm working with here is based on this framework, and our psyche has a very similar expansion and contraction, ebb and flow. We go through different phases of our life. So when we can just reclaim that super basic and yet very understudied, underexplored principle of life itself, which is so yogic, so based on all of these, agrarian cultures, again, it's just nature. It's the most basic framework of life. It helps us put in place what's happening for us psychologically. So basically, when we're in and this piece, this layer of it I did get from the Red School, and I love my teachers, Alexandra and Shawnee, so much there. When we're in the perimenopause journey, it's the premenstrual phase. It's that late fall into wintering phase. Of the winter phase, the winter season of our menstruality is the menstruation, the dark moon, the shedding, the releasing. The winter phase of our whole menstrual life is the menopausal transition. We return back to the beginning where we now no longer have a cycle. So we're in a wintering phase, a phase of fallowness, release, and then I layer in also the hero or the heroine's journey, which is this is the phase of the dark night of the soul. We're not riding high and like clear on what's happening and riding a plateau of the crest of the wave. We're in the underworld, we're in the shadow realms, we're in the dark night of the soul. And so it's normal. We're going to get back to the wave will crest again, and it will fall again. And so, but it's important to understand that we're in the psychological phase of development. So the whole menopausal transition is that wintering season.
Mhm.
And so you and I are both like in the thick of it right now. I feel like I might have tipped up from the very bottom of the south node on the scale, but I'm just barely tipping up. I'm not even sure if I'm on the upward swing yet, but yeah, so I want to put that in context, and I'll just close that loop. No pun intended, but to say that the initial spring phase, that birthing, building phase of our whole menstrual life is our teens and 20s, right? We
Yes.
we enter menstruation, we have this blossoming. Oh my God, we're becoming sexual beings, we're becoming, the maiden, the young woman energy. Then the summer phase, the apex is our 30s. That's when our fertility is like sort of the ripest. We're coming into our own in our life as a woman. We're really thriving. We're building, whether it's career, family, relationship. The fall is our 40s, and that's where our perimenopausal journey starts. And then back to the wintering phase for the menopausal transition. And then we enter what Chinese medicine calls in postmenopause, a threshold, the second spring. And so our postmenopausal life is our second spring. And so we could consider it that like the 60s, the 70s, the 80s again, right? So it helps to put it in context that we're going through these normal cycles in our life.
So are you trying to tell me that I might be in this for all of my 50s?
I would not say all of your 50s, but I do think it's normal to expect it's a multi-year journey.
I
And
mean, I'm
that's
kind of
something
in
that
the,
I don't really
yeah,
hear people saying. It's a multi-year journey.
yeah,
It's
it
just
is.
like, I really like the analogy. Well, first of all, there's three major thresholds that we go through potentially as women, two that are universal. Number one, entering menstruation. So puberty.
Mhm,
That's a multi-year journey. That's not
mhm,
just like one day you get your period and now you're good. No, your body is going through a complete metamorphosis from child to maiden to young woman.
mhm.
So everything is changing. Obviously, your body shape, you're developing breast, hips, all the things, fertility, menstruation, not to mention the psychology of, I look at my 14-year-old niece. She's an incredibly different person than she was 3 years ago. Three
Yep.
years ago, she was a kid.
Yeah.
Now she's a young woman, right? So
Mhm,
that's the metamorphosis. And if we
mhm.
can start to use that as an analogy, that the other bookend is menopause. And so we're going through a whole other, my 6 month menopause mentorship is called metamorphosis because for me, it's the best analogy. We are in a cocoon. We are completely reincarnating, reiterating from that caterpillar to the butterfly. And it takes time. It's a lot of breakdown. It's a lot of messiness. We don't even know what's going on really. And then we're starting to come into this new sense of self. And all of a sudden we sprout wings and we're like, whoa, I didn't even know this was a part of me, right? So there's a huge identity shift. There's a huge awakening. There's a huge loss and grief and reckoning, reconciling, unfinished business. It can come up here. And then the third potential threshold is into motherhood. If one does, get pregnant or have a child, however that child comes to you, and you're moving into what's called matrescence. And by the way, you move into matrescence, whether you have a physical child or not, birthing creative projects and your dharma and all of that. So those are the three big thresholds that we go through people with wombs, right? So this is a multi-year journey. This is not like a 6 month, let me just eat more protein and get on some HRT.
Yeah, thank you so much. By the way, we need to talk about HRT. And I do want to just make one thing. I want to say it in case it's helpful for anyone listening, because we now know that 1 out of 3 women are going through hysterectomies, even in their 30s. And
Mm,
so you still have the womb energy, irrespective of whether or not
yes,
you have a
correct.
uterus. I didn't really know that. And that was a huge part of waking up to myself and coming back to wholeness
Mhm.
in the ways that I am. Um, and it was just reclaiming that and reorienting my psyche around, no, like that's still there, right? And just the energetic around womb healing and womb cleansing. And it's been a huge part of my journey the past like 18 months. And so I feel like that wants to be spoken about because there are a lot of women that are carrying immense grief from these radical hysterectomies that they were told they had to have. Yeah, so
And I
there's
want to expand that conversation because it's definitely, first of all, the womb is the second chakra. It's
yeah.
Svadhisthana. It's men and women have womb energy. And obviously, women or people with, vaginas have a whole other level of that connection to the unmanifest that we birth, creation out into the manifest realm and, you know, all of those different aspects of birthing and fertility and creativity. And so yes, everyone has second chakra and womb energy. Now, those of us who were born with vaginas, uterus, women, female reproductive parts, um, there is a whole other level. And again, it's back to that cyclical, the hormonal shifts, the menstruation, menstruality, fertility, sexuality. Um, and so the womb, one of the big pieces of my mentorship and that I'm really passionate about is helping people with wombs to go through womb healing
Yeah.
and understand the womb initiations that we've had. Because whether it's medicalized and hysterectomy, for so many, I would say it's maybe 1 in 3. It's probably higher.
Mhm.
The percentage of the population that have experienced sexual assault and sexual trauma
Mhm.
and harm. It could be betrayal, it could be sexually transmitted diseases, it could be fertility challenges, birth trauma. There's so many different layers of womb initiations. And at this point, at midlife, all of us have experienced some kind of womb initiation. And that's not even to talk about, our culture's warped perception of sexuality and, body dysmorphia and eating disorders and body image. So all of this is wrapped up in the second chakra energy in the womb.
Mhm.
And when we're going through this initiation of menopause, we're talking about our wombs, we're talking about our hormones, we're talking about they're not, we're not fertile anymore. And that is and it's not just that piece, but it's all of this material that's coming up to be healed and to be looked at if it hasn't. And even if it already has been looked at, to really embrace. And as you said, coming back to wholeness and the integration and just radical compassion. And
Mhm.
some of the tools that I love so much for this are very deep ritual that we do, especially on retreats, live in person, but even in the online containers. And psychedelics can be really helpful for this, embodiment, yoga. There's so many different ways, but I do want to put people's attention on it's normal to be having these feelings or just be like, whoa, I'm just feeling, could be just aging and, feeling a loss of sex drive. Like there's a lot of grief around that. But yeah, there's a lot of womb initiations to be healed at this time.
Yeah, it's so good. And I really appreciate all the different iterations and contexts for the womb initiations, and especially around the trauma around sexuality and how warped things are.
Mhm.
Even like I'm here in Austin and it just is like this love is free and everyone's poly. And that's just not for me, but I know it's for a lot of people right now. But when I first got here, it was like everyone was doing like a yoni steam. And then I learned the distinction between a womb steam. And I was like, oh, for me, a womb steam was what my soul was calling for. I didn't need the yoni. It wasn't about the yoni. You understand the distinction. This is very delicate, pun intended, because I don't mean to cast any shame or shade. I'm just aware of even that for me felt slightly distorted and unsafe for the type of deep spiritual work that I was being called to walk, right? And it was coming home to my womb in a way where it was just like loving on her and like being so fiercely compassionate and like safe, you know. It's just like, oh my gosh. I mean, even thinking about my first steam, it was just like it opened up my heart chakra to this place of like inner safety and inner union actually. And it was like getting emotional thinking about it because I was so well held in that beautiful journey. But yeah, it's been wild these past like 18 months, 12 months specifically for all that you're talking about and going back to 13 years old of just even sisterhood feeling scary and connection feeling dangerous. And it was just like all of that showing up in relational dynamics. And it's just been so intense to see how I perpetuate it unconsciously and or how there's this sort of hypervigilance of where am I safe? Like, I don't know what your dark night of the soul was, but I would love to hear any context because it's felt like a zone of chaos that's felt insane. Like,
Mm.
someone stop
Yeah.
this, please, right? So I know we're going to get into some plant medicine work because that's a big part of your path as well as modalities for additional healing and embodiment. But yeah, please expand on your own dark night of the soul because I've heard you share bits and pieces of it was harrowing. You don't talk about a dark night of the soul lightly if you really know what it is, you
That's
know,
right.
and like you just before I really pass it over, I too have felt like I'm like, oh, I'm on the rise again. And then I'm like, whoop, go back down. There's like another layer, and I'm like, when does this end? And it's gonna end when it's time to end, you
Mm.
know? So I know
Yeah.
I'm very emotional and passionate, but that's how this feels right now. It's very true to what's
So
alive in
big.
me,
It's the
right?
biggest.
So big.
It's the biggest. I mean, it's the biggest. It's like, what else is there? I mean, honestly, I think because at midlife and this menopausal transition, one of the things that I've been contemplating a lot in my own psyche is like, well, when I went through, the initiation of wanting to, have a family so much and then looking for my partner and having several heartbreaks and am I ever going to find him? And, or then I finally did find him. And then we went through our fertility journey and then, or whatever other dark nights of the soul, deep heartbreak, like soul gut wrenching heartbreak. I always had, I'm looking back now in comparison and I'm like, oh, I always had the really strong fortitude of my identity as a really sexual and feminine and seductive, being. And so I kind of had that to fall back on, or I knew that was, it was like intrinsic. I just knew like, this is who I am and this is appealing and this is, the beauty, the sensuality, the youthfulness. And now it's different at 50, and that I don't believe beauty fades. I actually believe it gets better, but societally, we're not seen in the same way. And so there is this reckoning where it's like, okay, well, if I can't primarily identify with that, or that's changing and fleeting, who actually am I? It's a whole other level of ego death because I'm not just relying on the sort of training wheels that I always had of sense of self and confidence, my source, I should say, a source of confidence and value in the world. I kind of always had that in my back pocket. And so now at midlife, it's not there in the same way. I'm not viewed in the same way. And I personally have experienced a total drop in my sex drive. And so I don't even have my whole relationship to sexuality is changing.
Mm.
And therefore, my relationship to my partner is changing. And I'm having to really rediscover a lot of that. And so there's a grief and a healing in that too. So for me, this has sort of been such a pillar of my identity that's felt like, the bottom kind of dropped out, and I'm having to reestablish in a very deep unconscious way, who am I? Like, how do I identify myself? What are the tools? So for me, if I could always just go to sex or go to pleasure in this way or seduction, I don't have, I can't play those cards in the same way that I used to. And so it's forcing my hand to develop other aspects of who I am. So for me, that's been a huge part of the dark night of the soul, of a real ego death of I'm not this anymore, and the loss of the reproductive years and the fertility, even losing my menstrual cycle. Like I had grief about that, and I'm like, wow, I really did practice a lot of menstrual cycle awareness over the years and decades, and was very connected to like taking 3 days of real downtime around my cycle, and for
Mm.
most months, deeply going inward and communing, and even just to not have that, ebb and flow. But for me, to answer your question about my dark night of the soul, it really started. I did have physical symptoms, as I mentioned. I never had hot flashes, but I had night sweats, I had vertigo, pain during sex. I had frozen shoulder, which I didn't even realize
Yeah.
probably
Twice, right?
twice. I had it on one side, and I just thought I was like in my mid to early 40s. Probably I
Hmm.
was like 43, 44, because it
Hmm.
was before Bodhi was born. And I just thought it was like, oh, I'm not doing chaturanga right in yoga or something, So I went and got an MRI, and he's like, well, there's not really anything. I mean, maybe there's a little tear in your labrum. So, lay off of it. Basically, it was like the only, and it healed, And then the next year, I just all of a sudden one day I couldn't put my hands in prayer behind my back, And I was like, what happened? What just happened? Now I know that it was frozen shoulder, which nobody even mentioned at the time. It wasn't even on anyone's radar. So, especially with menopause. So, anyway, those were some of the physical symptoms I had. Definitely slow metabolism, definitely gaining weight around my middle. Also, very, impactful for my own sense of self and my own confidence and body image. These are all intricately entwined as a woman, any person, but definitely as a woman. And for me, the biggest symptoms were definitely cognitive and mental emotional.
Oh my God,
And
yes.
I started experiencing all of a sudden my confidence just dropped.
Yep.
I had never, I mean, we all have our insecurities, but I always had a general sense of confidence and competency. And it was like, I just couldn't, I got very overwhelmed in my business. Again, I'm in that, postpartum perimenopause. So I also just had a child, renovated a property. And so there was just a lot going on, COVID. But looking back, I just didn't have the resilience that I normally did. I always had balls in the air. I was always juggling so many things, and I actually thrived in that. And then all of a sudden, I just couldn't thrive, and I was freezing in kind of a freeze response. And then compounded with experiencing, depression, anxiety, lack of agency, lack of confidence, really kind of a panicked sense and feeling just frozen. And I didn't understand, I couldn't recognize it at all. And I also had a pretty significant cognitive issues, brain fog, coming down to my office and just sitting here like spacing out. Like, what am I supposed to be doing? I don't even know what I'm doing today. Like, what's going on in my business? And it had some really negative effects on my business. I actually decided to, along with that, I will say, was a real sense of what I had been doing at the time. I had built a whole school of yoga psychology, and I loved my training, Yoga Psyche Soul, and I loved my students, but it just didn't feel aligned anymore. And I had to put it on the back burner and just wait and pause and let spirit, let my psyche, talk to me. And I did launch my membership, which was amazing. And then eventually it became clear that I really wanted to speak into this menopause space and speak to the psycho-spiritual journey of it because it had been so intense for me. And I really didn't hear many people talking about it. So that's, come online, but it's been a very bumpy road. It's been very painful. I didn't find a lot of support when I was in the thick of it, and I was experiencing pretty significant depression and even suicidal ideation, which I don't say lightly. Is never like I was never like actually contemplating suicide, but the thoughts of like, wow, this is so intense. I just think I would like really having a disconnection from my own sense of goodness and worth on a
Mhm.
very basic level. So, um, that was a real wake up call because I was like, this is not me. Like, I don't, and that's the number one statement that people make going through menopause is, I don't feel like myself. I just don't feel like myself.
Mhm.
And that was me. I was like, I don't recognize this at all. Like, this is not my normal Ashley. And so it did send me on this bigger spiritual endeavor. And it's hard. So, one of the, there's several things that I want to suggest to people. The number one thing is how can you create more space and how can you take better care of yourself? And it's hard, right? It's hard when we have families or children to tend to, or partners or careers, and luckily, my partner's been very, supportive, and I was able to sort of reduce my workload to some degree, um, as much as I could to just tend to this inner life. And that's a real privilege, that we don't all have. And it's been very difficult, even in the midst of it. Um, but it's important to figure out where can we prioritize ourselves first? How can we prioritize deep rest? Because if you can like think back to the analogy that the menopausal transition is a season of wintering, this is a season of fallowness, of going quiet, of being dormant, and letting what's underground, as my priestess Ario would say, like the fall leaves, they're putrefying. So they're actually decaying, and that's what's becoming the fertilizer for the new spring, but it takes a long time. In a winter season takes months. In this phase, it might be years. For me, I've been thoroughly in this journey for 3 years. And it's not like every day I'm waking up and it's dark and heavy, but I'm not clear and I'm not on my path. I mean, I am on my path, but I'm not, feeling the vibrancy and clarity that I'm used to. And so it's a very difficult practice and it's a real spiritual discipline to give yourself permission to sit in what feels unproductive, unsexy, not glamorous, intense. It's the shadow, right?
The shadow. Gosh, everything that you said, pretty much verbatim, outside of that, I don't have a baby, but I have three fur babies. I'm experiencing. I am in the throes of it. The one thing that I would say, just based on this new training that I'm in that I love so much, and it's trauma and somatics, just to be a trauma informed practitioner. But I have this sense I may go deeper with it because it feels like it's so essential in these times for anyone who's in any sort of leadership position of guidance and mentoring and all the ways in which we care for those that, we have the honor to guide. But that said, when I've had suicide ideations come up too, and I'm like, that's not me. I want to give my friend Ruby a little bit of, I just want to say something because she said to me, can you make space for that also just to be allowed?
Yeah.
Like, what part of you could
Yeah.
that just be allowed to be true?
Yeah.
And just giving that permission to exist allowed that shadow to be seen, loved, and integrated, right? So when those thoughts do come up, and it's mine will be like, would I really do it? No, but would I be okay if I got taken in a lightning storm? Right? Like, so then it's like, as soon as that thought comes, I was like, is that really true for me? Or is that just the overwhelm of what I'm experiencing in this season of
Mhm.
winter? And
Mhm.
it's I always come back to that and I allow for it to still exist. And then I really declare like to God, like I want to live, I want to be here. Like let's be
Mhm.
clear, right? If there's purpose in my life, and I don't want to go in a car accident, right? I just really want to say that because there is an intensity that I'm feeling into in the collective right now and there are a lot of exit points and this time is so misunderstood as a woman and I'm so grateful that you are a bridge builder for so many of us because if I hadn't come across your work that day through obviously several mutual friends that we both care very deeply about and then gone to your website and thinking I was going to your retreat, and I will get to one, but my fur family sitter fell through last minute on menopause and bringing women together in sacred space and working with plant medicine. So I'm going to go there in a moment, but I don't know if I would have been able to make as much sense just even on the peripheral of
Mhm.
what this is. And when you talked on your landing page for Metamorphosis, this program, about how every unhealed part of ourselves is basically up for healing. I was like, every part of my being felt resonant with that. It rang so true. It was like, I don't need a doctor to talk to me about what my own experience is. That lands for me.
Mhm.
So it does feel a lit like you're going crazy. You articulated it so beautifully and so powerfully and so clearly. And so yes, amplify that. And it does seem like I'm a couple years behind you. And so is it a rite of passage? I don't know. I want to talk that before we move into plant medicine. What are your thoughts on how hormone replacement therapy, i.e., bioidentical hormone creams that I've been on since mid 40s, and I
Mhm.
realized you're supposed to have about a 7 year window. Tried getting off last year, had it was unbearable. 3 months, it was unbearable. I am so grateful for this. And it comes from a really good compound pharmacy in Santa Monica. And I have a really great endocrinologist and she turned naturopath actually. And so it's like I feel really good about her and my panels and I feel like we have a pretty good idea, but I would love to hear your thoughts and or even your own experience of how that might play into this rite of passage when we are clearly living decades longer than our ancestors, yet our hormones are depleting, yet we're on these bioidenticals. I mean, it's chaos. But where's the clarity in the chaos that you're seeing now?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a super complex question. I mean, hormones, first of all, I want to just, caveat by saying it's such an individual journey. And I think where we're seeing the medical world go and industry is to this bio-individual, you know, treatment where we really have to look at each individual uniquely and your family history, your genomics, all of the different aspects of your lifestyle and then treat that person individually. It's certainly not a one size fits all. The menopause hormone therapy or hormone replacement therapy world, there's so many options. It's really important to find a medical team, and I think it's more than just one person to work with to find your own best fit and to find a team and practitioners that are really, really well versed in menopause care because most OBGYNs at this point are not well versed in menopause care. And that's just the unfortunate nature of medical education and the system that we've all been brought up in. It's changing. There are a couple resources that are really important to check out. The North America Menopause Society, I think it's just menopause.org. They have a great directory of people that have been, certified. I'm on there as a psychotherapist, like people that have been certified through their programs or different, that they specialize in menopause. Mary Claire Haver on her site has a great directory. I saw someone else had another directory on their site, maybe Tamsin Fidel, I think. So to look for practitioners, there's so many great online options too. So in terms of finding your team,
Mhm.
Heather Hirsch is incredible out of upstate New York. Alloy is great. There's many different places that you can go, but find someone that really knows you, that's really willing to work with you, obviously listen to you, and that is up on the latest menopause education.
Yeah.
Most physicians are still working off of an outdated model of understanding hormone replacement therapy. So that's just like one basic caveat. Um, in terms of how this affects, I think it's so different for everyone. And my understanding of hormone replacement therapy, and I'll just say personally, like it completely saved my life. Like I don't know where I would be right now without hormone replacement therapy. So I found a functional medicine doctor. Immediately I got on estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. I feel like all three are so helpful.
Yeah.
We played with different, we've done different things. Like I was on a testosterone troche and then I was on the estrogen patch, and progesterone's always a capsule at night. But then we changed to pellets and I've been doing insertions and pellets for about the last 2 years. I'm kind of toying with the idea of going back because then my gynecologist was saying, well, pellets, they're not as controlled because they can like, your levels can go up and then they can go down before you're meant to go back. But what a patch is very, or the troche is like every day you're getting the same amount. So it's a little more controlled. So there's so many different factors. I don't think, that's, I'm certainly not the expert for hormone replacement therapy, but just to say, please have an educated decision, make an educated decision with your physicians and make sure you're really well taken care of and heard.
Mm.
Again, the way I look at menopause care is very much sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the first level is always physical safety, security, and physical health, because that's the foundation of everything else. So, getting your hormone plan in place, in my mind, is like number one. That's essential. And that is meant, it's a multi-pronged approach. It's nutrition, it's supplements, it's hormone therapy if you choose to go that route, lifestyle choices. There's so many different fitness, there's so many different factors there. Supplements. Then moving up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can start to address like what are the underlying mental, emotional, psychological contributing factors. Because what I found was while I went on the hormone replacement therapy, it was radically helpful. It really changed my life. It got me stabilized. I was very unstable. It got me stabilized. I realized, oh, now that I feel better physically and I have a little more energy and resilience to tackle things, I'm realizing I'm still experiencing like depression and anxiety because what's going on underneath the surface? I'm dealing with aging, which is something I don't hear a lot of people talking about. Like aging is really difficult for women in midlife, for most of us. I would say it's pretty universal, the challenges that we're faced with, the
Yep.
beauty myth. You know, we're dealing with reconciling at this threshold and crossroads of midlife, things in our life that didn't turn out the way we wanted, relationships, maybe we wanted to have kids, we didn't, we got in a marriage, it's not the right one, we had kids, they're not turning out the way we wanted, career, finances, like these are very big things. And this is where we start to get into the territory of midlife crisis, where we're like, whoa, is this really the life I wanted? Like, I'm disappointed. These things didn't work out. These things did. This is really where I want to go. How do I get there? We're dealing with aging parents, a sandwich generation, maybe of kids and aging parents. Um, we're looking at mortality in a much bigger way because we probably all had someone that we know that's passed away unexpectedly, or we face that mortality ourselves with a diagnosis. So there's a lot that's up for us. There's a lot of material, and along with the physical and hormonal, chaos. And so, stemming that chaos and getting stabilized first, and then starting to take on this inner work and really do the psycho-spiritual work of healing and coming into right relationship with ourselves.
Yeah, that wholeness. Yeah. Yeah, really beautifully said. Thank you for all of that. I'm like a yes, 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 and that too. Yes. Yeah, completely. The ageism is super real. There's a friend of mine, she's known as the urban goddess. Maybe you know Amanda Young from LA. Yeah,
Mhm.
she lived there for a very long time and then she was here for about 4 years and now she's in between. She's trying to figure it out after the LA fires. She's sorting a lot out. But she and I were going to collaborate on something because we really kind of hit it off last year when we met at a retreat as participants. So she was a speaker, um, and we started having this quick conversation around maiden mother crone and sort of that sort of evolution. She's like, she really doesn't love the word crone. And I was like, I think there's something here. I know that you call it like the sage essence or like the wise woman, or maybe I don't exactly remember your term on your metamorphosis program, but she's like, that's mystic. And there's something about that that I wish that, and maybe it's you, just like this threshold, this awakening, it's like, where's the honoring of, yes, all of the shedding, all of the winterizing, all of the letting go. And then that second spring, I can feel the promise of that, right? And also, I look at the women that I know that I'm friends with, or they've mentored me, or my own mother, and I'm like, it gets better and better and better, right? They just continue to let go and just emerge as their most authentic embodied self. And I'm just like, yes, I want more of that, where I'm not obsessed with what I look like and what is the light hitting me just right, or what's happening in the middle of my body, just like it's going out further than I've ever seen. And I'm just like, oh, this is so interesting. And so, yes, this maiden mother mystic, I like that trajectory. And so I feel like that's what this conversation is. And I don't think there's a question in there, but I'll pause before we just wrap up with plant medicine because it's a really important piece to your work. And I also think this midlife awakening.
Well, the maiden mother crone is such an ancient, it's the trifecta, which every spiritual tradition has this trinity, body, mind, spirit, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, maiden mother crone, birth, life, and then death, rebirth. So this is, or, in the Hindu tradition, the Trimurti or the Tridevi. And so there's this again is back to the cyclical wisdom of what we're living, all of us. And so it's a very universal framework. And the crone itself, well, first of all, I want to just start by saying I actually feel like we need, and what I teach in metamorphosis is that we actually need, because as you said, we're living decades longer than we ever have. And most of the women that I know at 50, like I don't yet quite resonate with being a crone because I don't feel like I'm quite in my eldership, and I am an elder. I am, moving into that mentoring phase. There's a gravitas at this age. There's a level of, not caring or wasting energy on things that are pretty, you know, not important in a certain way, but I don't feel like I'm quite embodying the crone energy, but I feel like I'm coming into something else, right? And so I actually feel like we need a fourth phase inserted between the mother and the crone,
Mm,
which one of my teachers, Joan Borisenko, calls the guardian. You
mm,
know, I've been playing with the idea of the sage or the wise woman,
mhm,
the activist. You know, it's essentially the psychological developmental phase of moving from being more egocentric to moving into, oh, I'm more concerned with the community care. And I'm going to advocate for community care. And it's not so much about my ambition and my drive is not so much about me and how it's going to serve me. It's more about how can I be in service? What is the legacy I'm leaving? What is my life for, you know?
yes.
And maybe it doesn't have to be some big grand gesture, you know, again, it could be parenting, it could be your community, whatever. But it's a developmental, an ego development into, and sort of in the chakra system, we move from the third chakra to the fourth chakra. So instead of the individual I, me, mine, we're moving into a community-based care of how is this serving others.
Yeah, we,
So
ours, us.
yeah, and that's where identity can shift. Like for me, I can see in my career, I'm not, I'm really not that interested in vanity metrics. Like I really don't give a fuck about Instagram. I just don't.
Mhm.
And yet, you know, how can I use this as a tool to serve the greater whole and really, you know, live my dharma in the most effective way? But where in the past I did want to be, you know, seen and acknowledged and well known. And I mean, it's not like it doesn't exist in me now, but it's just not my primary motivation. So there's a real shift in identity and ambition and drive for many people, I think, at this phase.
Yeah.
And then we do move into that crone phase of deep wise woman and sitting back, and it's a receptive energy and it's a real magnetic energy,
Yes.
among many other things. To speak to the concept of the crone, I firmly believe, you know, language is so important. And as women, as people who have, all of us have been raised in an incredibly patriarchal, capitalist, you know, systemic oppression society, and we have been, you know, feminine values have been omitted and demonized in our culture. And the crone actually comes from the word crown,
Mhm,
and it means to crown ourselves with
mhm,
wisdom, to crown ourselves with the embodied authority that we have at this stage of life.
mhm.
And I'm not just, you know, relegating it to women and not men, but certainly women. And I do believe that women hold a different level of embodied wisdom than the male body. I do actually believe that, and many cultures talk about that in Tantra. But in any case, I think it's important that we observe what is a pretty universal aversion to the word crone because it's been demonized. The elder woman and the wise woman has been demonized, I believe, because they are the most powerful force on the planet. And I think it's important that when we have, because so many people, including myself, you know, didn't like or don't like the word crone. Anytime there's an aversion, we need to ask ourselves, get curious about why.
Yeah, what happened? Yeah,
Yeah,
and I remember when she was describing it, and she was like using her body language, like just
yeah.
like
Old hag, witch, you know, wart, you know,
versus like
covered.
mystic and
Yeah, instead of like, what does a crone look like? Like, let's embody we are changing the narrative ourselves, and it's
yes,
up to us to do it. So,
yes.
for example, for me, when I'm on doing my like PowerPoint presentations and I'm Googling like stock images to put in my PowerPoints for, you know, midlife woman, everything I'm seeing is to me what looks like women in like 75 or 80 years old. I'm like,
Hmm.
this doesn't look like a 50-year-old, which is nothing wrong with that either, by the way. But I'm like, where is the problem in the ageism in our culture is that we don't even have many models
Mm-mm.
of what a thriving, vibrant, sexy as hell, you know, on fire 50, 55, 60, 65-year-old looks like.
Hmm.
Because, most women are trying to still look, many, I should say, are trying to still look 35. And it's
Well,
like, let's look, what does 55 look like,
yeah, especially where you are. It was so pervasive. I lived in LA for 33 years, and it was just this obsession with looking 35 forever, and then there are some that, like you, I would say, that do look 35, and it's genes, it's lifestyle, it's all the things, right? Probably facing our shadows. I really do feel like the fastest way to look more radiant and be more radiant and to look more youthful, literally on the external, is to be with your stuff. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, and maybe a little plant medicine work. So let's move there
Yes, let's
because
move into
this
that.
is our grand finale. But one little thing that's so important is this guardian sort of fourth phase. That's
Yes. Yes.
I'm there, so I recognize that yes, I'm no longer the mother. I'm out of fall. I thought I was in fall, but now I'm clear. Oh, yeah, this makes sense. I'm in winter. Hello. But I definitely do not identify with crone, probably more mystic for me. I'll just rephrase it. But I'm not there either.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and the parts that I have made insane about my experience is that I have told myself that that's where I already am, but it's not congruent. It's not how it feels, right? So it's like this gap of like, wait, that's where, but I'm not there. It's clearly I'm not in the mother, but so I'm here. No, there's this whole other piece.
Yeah, I like wise woman. I like sage, just really feeling into like, yeah, I feel there's wisdom that's,
I do too.
yeah,
Yeah,
matriculated.
because we can feel it, right? And then it's just like trying to sort out in business and relationships and lifestyle, like what fits now with this new paradigm, right? What's aligned here and what isn't? How do I even dress? Do I do my hair the same? Do I still wear like any makeup? Or should it be like all of it? It's like, do I even like, oh God, no filter on Instagram? Like all of it is just so up.
Mhm.
And it is what it is. This is a conversation to be continued, clearly. I know we're going a bit over, but I really know how important it is for you to weave the work with plant medicine into this portal, if you will, this season of awakening. And so I'd love for you to share about your work in this space and what you're really seeing for us as possibility going forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking this. And plant medicine and psychedelics, I would say, including compounds, have been the, I honestly believe they've been the greatest teachers of my spiritual journey for the last 30 years. And so, starting with psilocybin, and then I've had a really long, beautiful journey with ayahuasca.
Mhm.
I've led many retreats with ayahuasca over the last 20 years. Um, so I'm not sort of new on the psychedelic train, although I am now as a licensed therapist, really interested in the novel applications of psychedelics in therapeutic work and the powerful research that we're seeing, neuroscience with trauma resolution, particularly around MDMA, but also psilocybin for sure. And MDMA therapy, so I've had this long history with both psilocybin and particularly with ayahuasca, which is amazing. I bring it into my retreat settings. We did a beautiful retreat a couple of years ago with women, a women's midlife retreat, and we did a whole big ritual. I do a lot of ritual work. I used to run a priestess mystery school, a 13 moon
Mm,
mystery school. So I bring in a lot of ritual, and psychedelics, really are amplified, as is everything, in a ritual ceremonial space. And so that's something I've always been really passionate about. And we did
mm,
ayahuasca on this retreat, and it was just profound and so beautiful with all the women.
mm,
And then MDMA is a newer compound that I've been working with, and um, it truly saved my partnership. I'm engaged right now, and Aaron and I were really on the brink. And this was, unbeknownst to me, I was also fully in perimenopause and just really struggling. But we were, we had our daughter was not quite one, and we were just in the throes of new parenthood and again, building a house. And it was just incredibly stressful time, incredibly amazing time, and so many dreams coming true. And in our marriage, we were really in crisis, and one of my friends suggested MDMA therapy, and I'd heard about it. I'd done MDMA before, but we went and started working with who is now my teacher. And it changed everything. And it really saved our partnership. And he would say the same thing, and he does say the same thing. And it saved us multiple times because we now go about twice a year and work with our teacher. And it's an intensive 36-hour journey.
Mm.
Um, and the great thing about working with MDMA is that although I will say it is illegal, it is not it's a controlled substance. So that's important to state, but we're working with, an underground therapist. And so the great thing about MDMA is it's very conversive. You're really in therapy, like you're doing a prolonged therapy session and having the understanding, the embodiment.
Yes.
And MDMA is an empathogen, and so it opens your capacity. It softens in the neuroscience, part of the neuroscience of it is that it softens the DNS, default mode network, the DMN, part of the brain, which is the part of our brain that is self-referenced and focused on I, me, mine.
Yeah.
And so, in other words, we're really attached to our story of things. And
Mm.
so, MDMA softens that part and opens us up to be able to see things from other perspectives, other people's perspectives, to be more empathic. And it's incredibly healing for trauma. It's incredibly healing in couples work, personal work as well. So that has been a huge piece of my work. And I've been mentoring in that, as well as doing it, of course, for my own relationship and my own life. And it's really been a lifeline for me in this menopausal transition,
Mhm.
because it's been such a deep time of questioning and doubt and feeling the difficulty of staying, as my teacher Alexander Pope says, staying connected to my goodness and
Yes.
my value. That's been a harder place for me to stay contacted with.
Mhm.
And the MDMA has helped me with that.
Mm.
And so that's been amazing. And then I've been starting to, I'm now getting certified with IPI, the Integrative Psychiatry Institute, and working with psychedelics and, layering in ketamine. And so I love so much working with both individuals and couples and small groups of women,
Mhm.
in these different ceremonial spaces, because what I have found and what I've seen in my career over the last 25 years is one of the most healing, maybe even the most healing tool is to be witnessed and to be seen in your shadows, to be seen and name things, whether it's, traumas that happen to you or things you're ashamed of in your own life, and just own them and be with them in a compassionate, loving way and have other people appreciate them and not shame you or criticize you for that is so healing. To be authentic. We're all human. We all have shit. As one of my therapists used to say, we're all assholes, you
Yeah.
know? And once we really grok that,
Mhm.
it's deeply healing and it liberates us to explore and be curious about even more of those aspects of ourselves,
Mm.
as well as our beauty and our light. So, I do feel that psychedelics are one of the greatest tools to help open those doorways of perception and also the neural pathways and the physiology and the embodiment of it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that because I wasn't exactly sure which medicine. I didn't know if it was more psilocybin or what, but I can now see the range and what's brought you to this and also the potency of MDMA. I've done just MDMA journeys as part of the network that we talked about that you're aware of that I found from LA, but they're also based here in Austin. And they'll typically start you with that compound. And then if you want to go deeper, you can with other types of medicine. But I find that when I just do that, I can stay alert. The relational dynamic has sort of melted in the field, like whomever is there. So I'm just really open and, yes, embodied in that just pure love, compassion, bliss state. And then it stays with me for weeks,
Mm.
so it's almost like a rewiring of my nervous system, a resetting. Yeah, I forgot how powerful that is for me. I think I got onto this little pathway of thinking that compounds weren't going to be as good for me as like maybe sassafras because I love sassafras. It's more of a natural, but I think there's a time and a place for all of it, and I really appreciate you talking about the value that this has given you in this time. And I know that so many people listening are resonating because I'm looking at my clients, my friends right now who are we're all around the same age, like a 10-year gap, like 45 to 55, and so many women right around 50 are turning to plant medicine for the very first time. Never did it in their life, right? Never even like did ecstasy or anything way back, which I didn't either. But like, and now yeah, it just feels really important.
Yeah, it's a tool. It's a really powerful tool. So in the yogic system, which I come from, the chakra system is a big pillar of my teaching. And for each of the chakras, there's a different food that balances and helps open that chakra. And the food for the third eye center, which is our vision, which is our capacity to see beyond form, to see in an archetypal way, an archetypal lens in the world, the food is entheogens, which is plant medicine. And I find that really interesting because
Mm.
it's well known, and most, I would say, indigenous cultures have been using different plant medicines for millennia to awaken their powers of consciousness.
Yeah.
And so this is not, this is, and, now we have the neuroscience that's backing it up, which is so great. And I'm really hopeful that we'll see some progress, in the next couple of years, especially here in the United States with
Mhm.
using these novel treatments and legalizing them. There's a little bit of, support in Colorado and Oregon, but legalizing them more mainstream because they're so powerful for trauma resolution, for
Yeah.
exploring more traumatic memories, for softening the defense mechanisms, and helping people to see these patterns that they have in thinking or behaving that are not wholesome, they're not helpful. And we can then begin to literally rewire with neuroplasticity and the embodiment. And then if you layer in a good facilitator and maybe there's spiritual work involved or relational community work involved, those all of those things together can create really dramatic shifts for people.
Yeah.
Like I said, I mean, Aaron and I would not be together right now without MDMA therapy. And he would
Mhm.
sit here and say the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
it's happened multiple times. It's not just wasn't like a one and done. It was like we kept going back. We're in another moment of intensity and cry. Our pattern, we just get stuck in the pattern, and then the patterns are so strong. And even for me who's a therapist, or
Of
we have
course.
some awareness, it's like we're all human.
Yeah.
And so it's just given us a whole other language and a whole other orientation. And to your point, one of my great teachers, my root teacher, Ram Dass, talks about, once that aperture is opened, once you've experienced it, and what I love about psychedelics is there's a visceral experience and an expandedness in your embodiment where your nervous system is actually getting rewired, is
Yeah.
expanding into, that upper limit is expanding of what you can hold. And so once that aperture is opened, of course it goes back. And this is where the integration and integration coaching and therapy is so important, but it doesn't go all the way back to where you were. So you're
Can't.
going to stay in a little bit more expanded purview, right? And then a little bit more. There's a lot to say on it. And there's a lot of, addictive tendencies that can arise for people and not helpful or healthy ways of using psychedelics. And those things are really important to have set and setting and guidance and proper facilitation. But it's just such a huge tool and a powerful, beautiful tool. Not for everyone, but for those who are called.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. And one more thing that I'm obsessed about with you is my root teacher's Ram Dass as well. Yeah, still to this day, he's on my altar. A framed picture of him is just like such an important teacher in my life and continues to be even more so now. I just go back to so many of his lectures and I was like, it never gets old. It's so
Oh,
deep.
I mean, he's just so masterful. It's incredible. What a legacy. What a brilliant incarnation. Yeah.
Especially after he was stroked, you know? Talk about an awakening. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, such goodness here. I can't thank you enough. I know that we are definitely wrapping. Is there anything else that you wish you'd been asked or you'd like to share before also sharing where people can find you in most ease?
No, I'm just so grateful. It feels like, such alignment and sisterhood. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Yeah, such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And where is the best place for those who are curious about your work to check you out? Because I know that you're under some sort of construction.
Well, I am, yeah, deconstruction right now. I have my membership, my community, which is amazing, and we're getting ready to sort of reposition it as really a space for midlife and women going through not just menopause, but I would say midlife, this transition, this time of life. So it's yoga, meditation, spiritual, psychological, mental health tools, but my real aim in that, it's called the Haven. And my real aim in that is to give people a home. And it's a beautiful app on your phone. And I do live stream yoga, but also really deep discussions and rituals. So it's really based on cyclical living around the equinox, the solstice, the cross quarter holidays, around the full moon and the new moon. So you
Mm.
have these sort of embedded rhythms of practices that we go through together every week. That's the Haven, and you can DM me on Instagram, Haven, and the number two, and that should get you 2 weeks free. And then I have my menopause mentorship, which is called Metamorphosis. That's a 6 month journey together, and many, and all of these teachings and many great guest teachers. And then I'm getting ready to launch a mastermind and really a smaller, more curated group of women, maybe 10 to 15, combined with one of my dearest friends and deep business strategy, visibility, but also the deep inner work that then breeds the outer work and really honoring wherever you are in your life and what is aligned for you. So those are my core offerings right now, but also working with people one-on-one in coaching and then psychedelic therapy if they're interested in that. So
Yeah.
I would say the best place is, DM me on Instagram and we can be in touch there for sure. I have a
Okay.
bunch of freebies on there. So if you go onto Instagram, you can find all the links to those.
Okay, great. So we will definitely link to all that in the show notes. This has been such a needed conversation. So thank you from the bottom of my heart and my womb for sharing
Yes,
your magic and your medicine with us here today.
exactly. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you all for tuning in.
Mm.